Hello everyone and welcome to today's session on fiscal policy. In this presentation we'll explore how governments use spending and taxation to influence the economy, the tools they use and the challenges they face. By the end of this session, you'll have a clear understanding of how fiscal policy works and why it's such a critical tool for economic management. Let's get started. Let's start with the basics. Fiscal policy refers to how a government uses its spending and taxation to influence economic activity. The goal is to stabilize the economy, whether that means boosting growth during a recession or cooling down inflation during a boom. Fiscal policy is often compared to monetary policy, which is managed by the central bank and focuses on controlling the money supply and interest rates. While both aim to achieve stable prices and economic growth, fiscal policy is more directly tied to government decisions about where to spend money and how much to tax. For example, during a recession, the government might increase spending on infrastructure projects to create jobs and stimulate demand. Conversely, during periods of high inflation, the government might raise taxes or cut spending to reduce demand and prevent the economy from overheating. Now, let's dive into the objectives of fiscal policy. Governments use fiscal policy to achieve three main goals. Influence economic activity. Fiscal policy can be used to adjust aggregate demand, the total demand for goods and services in the economy. This is done through expansionary and contractionary policies. Expansionary policy involves increasing government spending or cutting taxes to boost demand. It's typically used during recessions to stimulate economic growth. For example, during the 2008 financial crisis, many governments increased spending on infrastructure and cut taxes to stimulate demand. Contractionary policy involves decreasing government spending or raising taxes to reduce demand. It's typically used during periods of high inflation to cool down the economy. For example, if inflation is too high, the government might raise taxes or cut spending to reduce demand and prevent the economy from overheating. Redistribute wealth and income. Fiscal policy can also be used to reduce inequality. For example, progressive taxes, where higher earners pay a larger percentage of their income, and transfer payments, like unemployment benefits or Social Security, help redistribute income from wealthier individuals to those in need. Allocate resources. Governments use fiscal policy to direct resources to key sectors of the economy. For example, spending on infrastructure like roads, schools, and hospitals can boost long-term productivity, while subsidies for green technology can encourage investment in renewable energy. In summary, fiscal policy isn't just about managing the economy, it's also about promoting social equity and ensuring that resources are allocated efficiently. Next, let's look at the tools governments use to implement fiscal policy. These tools fall into two main categories: spending tools and revenue tools. In terms of spending tools, transfer payments are payments made to individuals such as Social Security or unemployment benefits. They help redistribute income and provide a safety net for those in need. Current spending covers the day-to-day expenses of running the government, like salaries and office supplies. Capital spending refers to long-term investments in infrastructure such as roads, schools, and hospitals. These investments are crucial because they boost the economy's productivity in the future. Revenue tools. Direct taxes are taxes levied on income or wealth such as income tax, corporate tax, and capital gains tax. Indirect taxes are taxes levied on goods and services such as sales tax, VAT, and excise taxes. These taxes can be used not just to raise revenue but also to influence behavior. For example, high taxes on cigarettes can discourage smoking. These tools allow governments to influence the economy in different ways, depending on the situation. Now, let's discuss the advantages and disadvantages of fiscal policy tools. About advantages. Quick implementation. Indirect taxes like VAT or sales tax can be implemented quickly to raise revenue or discourage certain behaviors, for example, taxing cigarettes to reduce smoking. Social policies. Taxes can be used to promote social goals, such as reducing pollution or encouraging investment in renewable energy. On the other hand, these are disadvantages. Time lags. Direct taxes and transfer payments take time to implement. For example, changing income tax rates or increasing Social Security benefits can take months or even years. Delayed impact of capital spending. Infrastructure projects like building highways or schools take a long time to complete. By the time the projects are finished, the economy may have already recovered, reducing their effectiveness. Crowding out effect. When the government borrows money to fund its spending, it can drive up interest rates, making it more expensive for businesses to borrow and invest. This can reduce the overall impact of fiscal policy. In summary, while fiscal policy tools are powerful, they come with trade-offs that policymakers need to consider. Now, let's talk about one of the most important concepts in fiscal policy, the fiscal multiplier. This is the idea that government spending doesn't just have a one-to-one effect on the economy. Instead, it has a magnified effect. Here's how it works. When the government spends money, that money goes into the pockets of workers and businesses, who then spend it on goods and services. This creates more income for others, who in turn spend more, and so on. The size of this multiplier effect depends on two things: the marginal propensity to consume, MPC, which is how much of each additional dollar people spend, and the tax rate, which reduces disposable income. For example, if the MPC is 80% and the tax rate is 25%, the fiscal multiplier is 2.5. That means a 100 increase in government spending could lead to a 250 increase in aggregate demand. This is why fiscal policy can be so powerful. It doesn't just affect the initial spending, but it ripples through the entire economy. Now, let's talk about the balanced budget multiplier. This concept shows what happens when the government increases spending and taxes by the same amount. You might think that the net effect on the economy would be zero, but that's not the case. Here's an example. Suppose the government increases spending by 100 and raises taxes by 100. The increase in spending boosts aggregate demand by 250, using the fiscal multiplier we just discussed. At the same time, the tax increase reduces disposable income, which decreases consumption by 200. The net effect is an increase in aggregate demand of $50. This shows that even with a balanced budget, fiscal policy can still stimulate the economy. The key takeaway is that the balanced budget multiplier is positive, meaning that equal increases in spending and taxes can still boost demand. Now, let's discuss a more controversial idea, Ricardian equivalence. This is the theory that when the government runs a deficit, people anticipate higher taxes in the future to pay off the debt. As a result, they save more now to prepare for those future taxes, which offsets the increase in government spending. If Ricardian equivalence holds, then fiscal policy might not have any effect on aggregate demand at all. However, whether this actually happens in practice is still up for debate. Some economists argue that people don't always anticipate future taxes accurately, while others believe that Ricardian equivalence is a real phenomenon that limits the effectiveness of fiscal policy. Now, let's talk about how fiscal policy is implemented. Fiscal policy is carried out through changes in taxes and spending, which is known as discretionary fiscal policy. This is different from automatic stabilizers, which are built-in mechanisms that respond to economic conditions without the need for new legislation. In the discretionary fiscal policy, or expansionary policy, is used when the economy is operating below full employment, such as during a recession. The government increases spending or cuts taxes to boost aggregate demand. For example, during a recession, the government might pass a stimulus package to increase infrastructure spending or provide tax cuts to households and businesses. A contractionary policy is used when the economy is overheating, such as during periods of high inflation. The government decreases spending or raises taxes to reduce aggregate demand. For example, during an inflationary boom, the government might cut spending on non-essential programs or increase taxes to cool down the economy. About the automatic stabilizers. These are fiscal mechanisms that automatically adjust to economic conditions. For example, during a recession, tax revenues fall because people earn less, and government spending on unemployment benefits increases. Both of these actions increase the budget deficit and are expansionary. During a boom, tax revenues rise because people earn more, and spending on social programs decreases. Both of these actions reduce the budget deficit and are contractionary. Now, let's discuss the challenges of implementing fiscal policy. These challenges can limit the effectiveness of fiscal policy and make it difficult for governments to achieve their economic goals. Recognition lag. Policymakers may not immediately recognize when fiscal policy changes are needed. Economic data is often delayed, and it takes time to analyze and interpret the state of the economy. Action lag. Even after recognizing the problem, governments take time to discuss, vote on, and enact fiscal policy changes. This delay can be due to political disagreements or bureaucratic processes. Impact lag. Once fiscal policy changes are implemented, it takes time for them to affect the economy. For example, infrastructure projects may take years to complete, and their impact on economic growth may not be felt until long after the recession has ended. Crowding out effect. When the government borrows money to fund its spending, it can drive up interest rates, making it more expensive for businesses to borrow and invest. This can reduce private sector investment, offsetting some of the positive effects of fiscal policy. Supply shortages. If the economy is constrained by a lack of resources, e.g., labor or raw materials, fiscal policy may fail to boost demand and instead lead to inflation. For example, if there's a shortage of construction workers, increasing government spending on infrastructure may not lead to more jobs or economic growth, it may just drive up wages and prices. In summary, while fiscal policy is a powerful tool, these challenges can make it difficult to implement effectively. Policymakers need to carefully consider these factors when designing and implementing fiscal policy. Now let's talk about the two main types of fiscal policy: expansionary and contractionary. An expansionary fiscal policy. During recessions or periods of low economic growth. Increasing government spending or cut taxes. To boost aggregate demand and stimulate economic growth. For instance, during the 2008 financial crisis, many governments implemented expansionary fiscal policies by increasing spending on infrastructure and cutting taxes to stimulate demand. In the contractionary fiscal policy. During periods of high inflation or economic overheating. Decreasing government spending or raise taxes. To reduce aggregate demand and cool down the economy. For example, if inflation is too high, the government might reduce spending on non-essential programs or increase taxes to reduce disposable income and slow down demand. On the other hand, about the indicators of fiscal policy stance. A budget surplus and deficit. An increase in the deficit or decrease in surplus indicates expansionary policy, while a decrease in the deficit or increase in surplus indicates contractionary policy. Tax and spending changes. Increases in government spending or cuts in taxes are expansionary, while decreases in spending or increases in taxes are contractionary. For example, if the government announces a new infrastructure spending program and cuts income taxes, this is clearly an expansionary policy. Conversely, if the government raises sales taxes and reduces spending on social programs, this is a contractionary policy. In summary, expansionary and contractionary fiscal policies are used to manage the economy during different phases of the business cycle, and the choice of policy depends on the economic conditions and goals of the government. Finally, let's discuss the structural budget deficit. This is the deficit that would occur if the economy were operating at full employment. It's a useful measure because it helps us understand the true impact of fiscal policy, independent of economic cycles. For example, during a recession, tax revenues fall and unemployment benefits increase, leading to a larger deficit. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that fiscal policy is expansionary, it could just be the result of automatic stabilizers. By looking at the structural deficit, we can get a clearer picture of whether the government is actively using fiscal policy to stimulate or contract the economy. To wrap up, fiscal policy is a powerful tool for managing the economy, but it's not without its challenges. From the fiscal multiplier to Ricardian equivalence, there are many factors that determine how effective fiscal policy will be. Policymakers need to carefully consider the timing, implementation, and potential side effects of their decisions. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions or discuss further.